The sun's harsh rays beat down on Lucinda Ames as she slumped against the wooden post, blood trickling from her split lip, wrists raw from the rough hemp rope binding them. The auction block beneath her knees was stained with years of despair, but none so deep as her own on this sweltering July afternoon in 1875. Next up, gentlemen. A spirited filly with plenty of fight left in her. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty square of Aztec, New Mexico territory. Rough laughter erupted from the crowd of miners, ranchers, and drifters who had gathered for the illegal debt auction, a thinly veiled slave trade that persisted in shadows despite the Emancipation Proclamation. Lucinda blinked against the sun, her vision blurry from the blow to her head she'd received when trying to escape earlier. 22 years of life, and this is where it led. The daughter of a once prosperous rancher, reduced to human chattel after her father's death left debts that predatory bankers were all too eager to collect with interest. Bidding starts at $50 for this fine specimen. Look at that golden hair, those green eyes. A bit bruised, but nothing that won't heal. Who'll give me 50? A voice called out from the back. 45. I've got 45. Who'll give me 50? Another voice. 50. As the bidding climbed, Lucinda closed her eyes, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her tears. She'd been taught to ride horses before she could walk, had helped her father deliver calves, could shoot straighter than most men in the territory. Now she was being sold like livestock. I've got $80 going once. The creak of the saloon's batwing doors barely registered amid the shouting. A tall figure stepped into the afternoon light, his shadow stretching long across the dirt square. The crowd parted instinctively. $1,000. The quiet voice cut through the commotion like a knife. Silence fell as every head turned toward the stranger. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered in a dust-covered black coat. A well-worn Stetson shaded eyes that surveyed the scene with cold calculation. A star glinted on his vest. "Well now," the auctioneer stuttered, "seems we have a serious bidder. $1,000 from the gentleman in black, going once." No one dared counter the bid. The stranger's hand rested casually near his holstered Colt, going twice. Sold to the gentleman for $1,000. Lucinda raised her head, finally looking at her purchaser. His face remained impassive as he approached the auction block, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. He counted the money deliberately, placing it in the auctioneer's greedy palm. "Papers," he said simply. The auctioneer fumbled with documents, handing them over with a nervous smile. The stranger examined them before folding and tucking them inside his coat. Only then did he look directly at Lucinda. "My name is Flynn Sutton," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm the Marshal of Silver Creek, over in Colorado territory, and as of this moment, Miss Ames, you're free." The rope fell away from her wrists as he cut it with a small knife. When her legs buckled beneath her, his steady hands caught her shoulders, supporting her weight with surprising gentleness. "Why?" she whispered, disbelief clouding her thoughts. "Let's get you somewhere safe first," he answered, guiding her away from the auction block. "Questions can wait." As they moved through the muttering crowd, Marshal Sutton's presence kept challenges at bay. Lucinda could feel the tension crackling in the air. These men had been cheated of their sport, and they weren't happy about it. "My things," she managed to say, her throat dry. "At the jail." Flynn nodded, adjusting their course. "We'll retrieve them. Then we're leaving Aztec. This town isn't safe for either of us now." The town jail was a squat adobe building at the end of the main street. Inside, the deputy startled to his feet when they entered. "Marshal." "I was just—" "Save it, Jenkins," Flynn cut him off. "The lady's belongings. Now." The deputy scurried to a back room, returning with a small canvas bag. "Sheriff Wilkes ain't gonna like this," he muttered. "Sheriff Wilkes is running an illegal auction in broad daylight," Flynn replied coolly. "He might want to consider his position before raising objections." Outside, Flynn led her to the livery where a powerful black gelding waited. Next to it stood a chestnut mare, already saddled. "I took the liberty," he explained, securing her bag to the saddle. "Can you ride?" Lucinda straightened her spine despite her pain. "Better than most men." A flicker of something approval perhaps crossed his face. "Good. We've got ground to cover before nightfall." They rode out of Aztec without looking back, Lucinda fighting waves of pain and confusion. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they headed north, keeping a steady pace. Only when the town had disappeared behind a ridge did Flynn slow their mounts. "There's a creek about a mile ahead," he said, studying her pallid face with concern. "We'll stop there. You need water and rest." The creek was a ribbon of silver cutting through the red earth. Flynn dismounted first, then helped Lucinda from her saddle. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched ground. "Easy now," he murmured, supporting her to a flat rock by the water. He produced a clean handkerchief, dampened it in the creek, and offered it to her. "For your face." Lucinda took it with trembling fingers, pressing the cool cloth to her split lip and bruised cheek. The simple kindness nearly undid her composure. "Why did you do this, Marshal?" she asked when she trusted her voice. "You don't know me." Flynn knelt by the creek, filling his canteen. "I knew your father," he said after a moment. "James Ames was a good man, helped me track down a gang of rustlers some years back." He handed her the canteen. "When I heard his daughter was being sold to cover his debts, I knew something wasn't right." Lucinda drank deeply, the water reviving her parched throat. "The bank claimed he owed them thousands, after the drought killed half our cattle and then the fever took him." She blinked back tears. "Sheriff Wilkes said the land and house weren't enough, that I had to work off the rest." Flynn's jaw tightened. "That's not how the law works. Law doesn't mean much in Aztec these days." "No, it doesn't." He sat beside her on the rock, keeping a respectful distance. "I've been tracking a ring of corrupt officials across the territories. Bankers and lawmen working together to seize properties, especially from those without protection, widows, orphans. And you think my father was one of their victims? I know he was." Flynn reached inside his coat, pulling out the papers he'd received at the auction. "These aren't legal documents. They're forgeries, and poor ones at that." A spark of anger flickered to life inside Lucinda. "Then my ranch may still legally be yours, but claiming it won't be simple or safe." He studied her face. "Those men back there won't forgive the humiliation easily, Sheriff Wilkes in particular." Lucinda touched her bruised face, remembering Wilkes' fists when she'd refused his advances in the jail cell. "No, I don't imagine he will." "I have a proposition, Miss Ames," Flynn said after a thoughtful silence. "Come with me to Silver Creek. It's a decent town with good people. I need to gather evidence against this corruption ring, and your testimony would be valuable. In return, I'll help you reclaim your property legally and safely." Lucinda stared at the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. What choice did she have? Return alone to a ranch she couldn't prove was hers, facing men who wanted to own her, or trust this Marshal she barely knew? "Why should I believe you're any different?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "You still bought me, Marshal Sutton." "I didn't buy you, Miss Ames," he corrected gently. "I bought your freedom. There's a difference." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "You're free to ride in any direction you choose. I won't stop you." Lucinda looked at his outstretched hand. Calloused, strong, a working man's hand, not a schemer's soft palm. His eyes held no deceit she could detect, only a steady resolve that somehow calmed her racing heart. "Silver Creek," she said, taking his hand and rising to her feet. "How far?" "3 days' ride, good weather permitting." She nodded, decision made. "Then we'd better make camp soon. Daylight's wasting." Flynn's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes, madam." They rode until dusk painted the western sky in shades of fire. Flynn selected their campsite with care, a defensible position with good visibility, sheltered by rock formations with the creek still accessible nearby. While he tended the horses, Lucinda gathered wood for a small fire. Every movement sent pain shooting through her bruised ribs, but she refused to show weakness. Pride was all she had left. "You should rest," Flynn said, returning to find her struggling with an armload of kindling. "I can manage this." "I'm not helpless," she insisted, though her arms trembled with exhaustion. "Never thought you were." He took the wood from her, arranging it for a fire. "But smart travelers share the work. Tonight you rest, tomorrow you take watch while I sleep. That's fair division." His practical approach disarmed her defensiveness. Lucinda sank down on her bedroll as Flynn struck a match to the kindling. The small flame caught, dancing yellow and orange in the gathering darkness. From his saddlebags, Flynn produced jerky, biscuits, and a small pot of beans. "Not fancy, but it'll keep body and soul together." "Better than jail food," Lucinda replied, accepting her portion with genuine gratitude. They ate in companionable silence as stars appeared overhead, brilliant in the clear desert sky. The fire's warmth soothed Lucinda's aching body, and the food restored some of her strength. She studied her rescuer covertly as he stared into the flames. Flynn Sutton was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting across vast distances. A thin scar traced his jawline, disappearing into the shadow of stubble. His hands were sure and steady in everything they did. "You have questions," he said suddenly, looking up and catching her gaze. "Ask them." Lucinda didn't bother denying it. "How did you know I was being auctioned today?" "I've been tracking these operations for months. Got word from an informant that Wilkes was holding a special auction. Didn't know it was you until I arrived in town last night. And you just happened to have $1,000 to spend." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Government funds. The territorial governor is backing this investigation. Corrupt officials stealing land are bad for settlement and business. So I'm part of your investigation now, if you choose to be." Flynn added wood to the fire. "But my helping you doesn't depend on that. I owed your father, and what they did to you was wrong on every level." Lucinda wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "Sheriff Wilkes said no one would believe me. That women make accusations all the time when they are in trouble." Flynn's expression hardened. "Did he hurt you beyond what I can see?" "No." She looked away. "He tried. I fought. That's how I got these." She gestured to her bruises. "He said he'd save the rest for after he bought me." "He won't touch you again," Flynn stated with quiet certainty. "That's a promise." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "You take your job seriously, Marshal." "The law is meant to protect people, not prey on them." He poked at the fire. "When men with badges become the danger, someone has to stand against them, even if it's dangerous, especially then." He looked up at the stars. "My father was a lawman too. Died trying to arrest a judge's son for murder. Judge had him killed to protect his boy." His voice remained steady, but Lucinda could hear the old pain beneath. "I was 15. Learned then that a badge can be worn by the best of men or the worst. And you chose to wear one anyway. Someone has to stand for what's right." He shrugged as if the choice had been simple. "Get some rest, Miss Ames. I'll take first watch." "Lucinda," she said softly. "If we're traveling together, you might as well use my name," he nodded. "Lucinda, then, and I'm Flynn to my friends." "Are we friends, Marshal Sutton?" His eyes met hers across the fire. "I hope we might become so." Lucinda settled onto her bedroll, exhaustion finally overtaking her. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Flynn's silhouette against the star-filled sky, vigilant and steady. She dreamed of her father's ranch of sunrises over the pasture and the smell of sage after rain. In her dream, she was riding fence lines, checking cattle, free as the wind. But shadows gathered at the edges, dark figures with greedy hands reaching for what was hers. Lucinda woke with a start, heart pounding. The fire had burned low and the night had grown cold. Flynn sat where she'd last seen him, his rifle across his knees. "Bad dreams?" he asked quietly. "Memories and fears," she admitted, sitting up. "What time is it?" "About 3 hours till dawn." "Go back to sleep. I'm awake now." She pulled her blanket around her shoulders. "I can take watch if you need rest." Flynn studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Wake me at first light." He handed her the rifle. "You know how to use this, since I was 12. He settled onto his own bedroll, hat pulled low over his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing had slowed to the rhythm of sleep. Lucinda added wood to the fire, then moved to sit where Flynn had been, rifle ready across her lap. The desert night was alive with sounds: the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through scrub, the occasional rustle of some small nocturnal creature. She studied Flynn as he slept. His face was different in repose, younger, less guarded. Whatever burdens he carried seemed momentarily lifted. What kind of man risked himself to save a stranger because of a debt to her dead father? In her experience, men always wanted something in return. Yet Flynn Sutton had offered her freedom with no conditions. The realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Dawn broke in streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky. As the first light touched the campsite, Flynn stirred and sat up, instantly alert. "All quiet?" he asked, reaching for his hat. "Nothing more threatening than a jackrabbit," Lucinda confirmed, returning his rifle. They broke camp efficiently, sharing the tasks without need for discussion. Flynn checked the horses while Lucinda packed their supplies. When he helped her mount, his hands were respectful, steadying her without lingering. "Your ribs are bothering you," he observed as she winced, settling into the saddle. "They'll heal," she said, straightening her spine with determination. Flynn regarded her thoughtfully. "We'll stop at midday to rest the horses. There's a trading post about 5 hours' ride from here. We can get supplies and maybe find something for those bruises." The day warmed quickly as they rode north, following game trails and old wagon tracks rather than the main roads. Flynn explained they were taking a less direct route to avoid potential pursuit. "Wilkes has friends throughout the territory," he said. "Until we're well into Colorado, we need to be cautious. You think he'd come after us? $1,000 is motivation enough. Add wounded pride and fear of exposure." Flynn adjusted his hat against the climbing sun. "Yes, I think he might." They rode side by side when the trail allowed, Flynn pointing out landmarks and sharing knowledge of the territory. Despite her pain and the uncertainty ahead, Lucinda found herself enjoying the journey. Flynn was a quiet companion, but not unfriendly. When he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often surprisingly witty. By midday, they reached a small plateau overlooking a vast expanse of red rock country. Flynn called a halt near a stand of juniper trees that offered welcome shade. "Rest here," he said, helping Lucinda from her saddle. "I'll see to the horses." Lucinda sank gratefully onto a flat rock, stretching her aching legs. The bruising on her ribs had deepened overnight, creating a kaleidoscope of purple and blue beneath her shirt. She pressed gently, assessing the damage, and stifled a gasp of pain. "Broken?" Flynn asked, returning with their canteens. "Just bruised, I think," she replied, accepting the water. "I've had worse falls from horses." Flynn's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Instead, he pulled a small tin from his saddlebag. "Arnica salve," he explained, offering it to her. "Good for bruises. My mother's recipe." Lucinda took the tin, surprised. "You carry your mother's remedies." She was a healer. "Taught me a thing or two before she passed." He looked away, suddenly interested in adjusting his saddle. "I'll scout ahead while you tend to things." His consideration for her modesty touched Lucinda. She waited until he'd walked a respectful distance before loosening her shirt enough to apply the salve to her ribs. The ointment smelled of herbs and beeswax, cooling the inflamed skin almost immediately. When Flynn returned, she was seated comfortably, enjoying the view of the valley below. "Your mother's remedy works wonders," she told him. "The pain's already easing." "Good." He seemed pleased. "We should reach the trading post by mid-afternoon. After that, the terrain gets rougher. We'll climb into pine country before evening." "I've never been to Colorado," Lucinda admitted. "Is Silver Creek very different from New Mexico? Greener? Higher elevation?" Flynn sat beside her, breaking off pieces of jerky for them both. "It's a mining town that's settling into something more permanent. Silver played out, but there's good cattle country surrounding it and the railroads coming through next year." "And you're the law there?" He nodded. "For the past 3 years. Good people, mostly. Like anywhere, there's trouble now and then, but nothing like what's happening down here." "How did you become involved in this investigation?" Flynn chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Started noticing a pattern. Ranchers or farmers would die, usually those without family or with only women left behind. Banks would claim impossible debts. Properties would change hands to the same few men. When I brought my concerns to the territorial governor, he authorized me to dig deeper. And it led you to Aztec." "Eventually. The operation crosses territorial lines, makes it harder to prosecute." He glanced at her. "Your father's case could be the key. He kept good records, was respected in the community. If we can prove fraud in his case." "We could expose all of them," Lucinda finished, understanding dawning. "That's why you really saved me." Flynn's eyes met hers directly. "I saved you because it was right. The rest is providence, maybe." Lucinda wanted to believe him. 3 days ago, she would have dismissed such nobility as fantasy. But there was something about Flynn Sutton that rang true, a steadiness that couldn't be feigned. "My father's records are still at the ranch," she said. "Or were when they took me. We'll retrieve them," Flynn promised. "But first, we get you somewhere safe." They mounted up and continued their journey, the terrain gradually changing as they rode north. Scrubland gave way to scattered pinyon pines, and the trail began a gentle climb into rockier country. Mid-afternoon brought them to a weather-beaten building nestled in a small valley. Garrett's trading post, according to the faded sign. A few horses were hitched outside, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. Flynn surveyed the scene carefully before approaching. "Stay close," he advised Lucinda. "Most folks here are honest, but news travels fast." The trading post's interior was dim after the bright sunlight. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from flour to ammunition. A pot-bellied stove occupied the center of the room, surrounded by barrels that served as seats for the 3 men playing cards nearby. Behind a rough-hewn counter, a gray, bearded man in suspenders looked up as they entered. "Marshal Sutton," he greeted with genuine warmth. "Been a spell since you passed through." "Garrett," Flynn nodded. "Business brings me south this time." The old trader's eyes flicked to Lucinda, taking in her bruised face with a practiced neutrality. "I see, the usual supplies. And a few extras," Flynn confirmed. "The lady needs proper traveling clothes, food for the trail." While Flynn discussed provisions with Garrett, Lucinda browsed the store's modest selection of women's goods. Her own clothes were filthy from the jail and her ordeal, and the prospect of clean garments was powerfully appealing. She selected a sturdy split riding skirt, 2 cotton shirts and undergarments, along with a practical hat to shield her face from the sun. When she approached the counter with her choices, Flynn was concluding his business with Garrett. "Any strangers asking questions, you haven't seen us," the marshal was saying quietly. Garrett nodded. "Understood. Trouble following? Might be. Best you don't know details." The trader added Lucinda's selections to their purchases without comment. "There's a washroom out back if the lady wants to freshen up," he offered. "My wife keeps it stocked with soap and clean towels." Lucinda accepted gratefully. The small room behind the trading post was simple but clean, with a copper basin, pitcher of water, and the promised soap. She washed away days of grime and changed into her new clothes, feeling somewhat restored by the simple act. When she returned, Flynn was loading their supplies onto the horses. He glanced up as she approached, his expression flickering with something she couldn't quite interpret before he regained his usual composure. "Feel better?" he asked. "Immensely." The clean clothes and washed face had indeed improved her spirits considerably. Flynn nodded approval. "Garrett says there's a storm coming. We need to make good time if we want to reach shelter before nightfall." They rode out from the trading post with renewed purpose. The afternoon sun hung lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the trail. As they climbed higher into the foothills, pine trees grew more numerous, their sharp scent filling the cooling air. Flynn was right about the storm. Dark clouds gathered on the northwestern horizon, and a restless wind stirred the pine boughs overhead. The horses sensed the changing weather, growing skittish and eager to move faster. "There's an old line cabin about 3 miles ahead," Flynn said, studying the darkening sky. "Used by cattle outfits during seasonal drives. Should be empty this time of year. Will we make it before the storm?" Lucinda asked, noting how rapidly the clouds were advancing. "If we push the pace." They urged their mounts to a canter, following a trail that grew steeper and narrower as they climbed. The wind increased, carrying the first spatters of rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Lucinda's mare tossed her head nervously. "Easy, girl," she soothed, stroking the horse's neck. "We're almost there." Flynn pointed ahead to where the trail curved around a granite outcropping, just beyond that ridge. They rounded the bend to find a small log cabin nestled against the hillside, sheltered by towering pines. A lean-to stable stood alongside, offering refuge for the horses. They reached it just as the storm broke in earnest. Rain pounded the roof as Flynn helped Lucinda dismount, then quickly led both horses into the lean-to. Lucinda hurried to the cabin door, finding it unlocked as Flynn had predicted. The interior was basic, but a stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rough table and 2 chairs nearby. A narrow bunk with a straw mattress occupied the corner farthest from the door. The small window was covered with oilskin that kept out rain but admitted dim light. Lucinda set about clearing cobwebs while Flynn tended the horses. By the time he entered, shaking water from his coat, she had found a stack of firewood beside the hearth and was arranging kindling for a fire. "Looks like we beat other travelers to it," she observed. "There's enough supplies here to suggest it's maintained." Flynn nodded, hanging his wet coat and hat on pegs by the door. "Cattlemen's Association keeps these cabins stocked for emergencies. Code of the range: use what you need, replace what you can, leave it better than you found it. The kindling caught quickly, and soon a cheerful fire pushed back the cabin's chill and dampness. Outside, rain continued to fall in sheets, drumming on the roof and streaming past the small window. Flynn brought in their saddlebags and the supplies from the trading post. "We're lucky," he said, surveying their shelter. "Storm like this on the open trail would be miserable." "Is this a common route for you?" Lucinda asked, helping unpack their food supplies. "Used to be. These days I travel more by train when possible." He pulled coffee and a battered pot from his saddlebag. "Trail still has its advantages, though. Harder to follow, easier to spot pursuit." They prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, accompanied by strong coffee. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin grew warm and surprisingly comfortable. After days of fear and uncertainty, Lucinda found herself relaxing for the first time. "Tell me about Silver Creek," she requested as they sat by the fire, savoring the hot coffee. "What kind of place is it?" Flynn settled back in his chair, stretching his long legs toward the hearth. "Started as a mining camp 15 years ago. Had the usual growing pains: saloons outnumbered churches 20-1, but it's settling down now. Got a school, proper businesses, families putting down roots." "And you keep the peace?" "Try to." He smiled faintly. "Most days it's just settling disputes between neighbors or rounding up cowboys who have had too much whiskey. Serious trouble's rare, especially since the mining boom ended." "It sounds normal," Lucinda said, a wistful note in her voice. "Peaceful. Could be a good place for a fresh start," Flynn suggested carefully. "Once this business with your ranch is settled." The thought of never returning to her family home sent a pang through Lucinda's heart. "The ranch is all I have left of my parents." "Land is just land," Flynn said gently. "Memories travel with you." Spoken like someone who's left homes behind. He nodded, eyes on the fire. "A few, never found one worth fighting for until Silver Creek." "What made it different?" Flynn considered the question, taking his time to answer. "The people, I suppose. They needed someone to stand between them and chaos. Being needed changes things." Lucinda understood that feeling. The ranch hands had depended on her after her father died. Their loyalty had made her stronger, more determined to save the place. Until Sheriff Wilkes had arrived with his fraudulent papers and armed deputies. "My father taught me that land, properly cared for, gives back everything you put into it," she said, watching the flames dance. "Our ranch supported 3 families besides our own. Good land, good water." "No wonder they wanted it," Flynn observed. "I should have fought harder," she whispered, the admission painful. "When they came with the papers, I should have, what, gotten yourself killed." Flynn's voice was firm but not unkind. "You were one woman against armed men with corrupt law behind them. Living to fight another day was the right choice." "If I hadn't been alone—" "You're not alone now," he interrupted, meeting her gaze steadily. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection deeper than circumstance, an understanding that needed no words. Lucinda felt her cheeks warm, and she looked away first. The storm's fury gradually diminished, rain settling into a steady patter on the roof. Outside, night had fallen completely, turning the window into a black square broken occasionally by lightning. "We should get some rest," Flynn said, breaking the silence. "You take the bunk. I'll manage here by the fire." Lucinda started to protest, then recognized the futility. Flynn Sutton was a gentleman in the old-fashioned sense, and arguing would only make both of them uncomfortable. "Thank you," she said instead, rising from her chair. "For everything." Flynn nodded, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Sleep well, Lucinda." The narrow bunk was more comfortable than it looked. the straw mattress surprisingly soft after days of hard ground. Lucinda pulled the rough blanket over herself, watching as Flynn arranged his bedroll near the hearth. The fire's glow silhouetted his profile as he added another log, then settled back against his saddle. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Lucinda. Her mind raced with everything that had happened, everything still to come. The ranch, the corrupt officials, the uncertain future. And Flynn Sutton, the lawman who'd saved her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. "Flynn," she said softly, uncertain if he was still awake. "Yes." His immediate response suggested he hadn't been sleeping either. "Why did you really come for me? The truth." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Finally, Flynn spoke, his voice low. "Your father saved my life once, not just by helping track those rustlers. I was gut-shot, bleeding out. He carried me 3 miles to a doctor, stayed with me through the night." A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "When I heard what happened to him, what they were doing to you, I couldn't stand by." "You're a good man, Flynn Sutton." "I try to be," he replied simply. "Now sleep. Tomorrow's another long day." Lulled by the rain and the fire's warmth, Lucinda finally drifted into dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of coffee brewing. Flynn stood at the fireplace, stirring something in a small pot. Outside, birds sang in the aftermath of the storm. "Morning," he greeted, glancing over his shoulder. "Sleep well, better than I have in weeks," Lucinda admitted, sitting up and smoothing her hair. "What time is it?" "Just past dawn. Storms cleared out, should be good traveling weather." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "Breakfast's almost ready. Nothing fancy, oatmeal with dried apples." They ate quickly, then set about breaking camp. The morning air was fresh and cool after the storm, the surrounding pines glistening with raindrops. As they saddled the horses, Lucinda noticed Flynn scanning the trail behind them, his expression watchful. "Expecting company?" she asked. "Always wise to be prepared," he replied, checking his Winchester before sliding it into its scabbard. "We're still in New Mexico territory. Won't feel completely safe until we cross into Colorado." They rode steadily through the morning, climbing higher into pine-covered mountains. The trail narrowed in places, forcing them to ride single file. Flynn led the way, occasionally stopping to check their back trail or consult landmarks. By midday, they reached a high pass that offered views in all directions. Flynn reined in his gelding, gesturing for Lucinda to join him at a rocky overlook. "There," he said, pointing northward to where distant mountains rose blue against the horizon. "That's Colorado territory. We'll cross the border by evening." Lucinda studied the vast landscape spread before them, rugged, beautiful, wild. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "Worth fighting for," Flynn agreed quietly. They continued their journey, descending from the pass into a series of valleys that grew progressively greener and more lush. Game was plentiful. Deer bounded away at their approach, and once they spotted a black bear fishing in a stream, though it paid them no attention. Late afternoon found them following a swift-flowing river northward. Flynn grew visibly more relaxed as they approached the territorial border, though his vigilance never completely disappeared. "There's a way station just across the border," he told Lucinda. "Run by a widow named Sarah Blackburn. Good woman, discreet. We can get a proper meal there, maybe real beds for the night." "That sounds heavenly," Lucinda admitted. Days in the saddle had taken their toll, despite her experience as a rider. They crossed into Colorado as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The way station appeared just as Flynn had described, a sturdy log structure with smoke curling from its stone chimney, nestled in a clearing beside the river. Several horses stood in a corral nearby, and chickens scratched in the yard. A gray-haired woman emerged from the building as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Her weathered face broke into a smile of recognition. Marshal Sutton, now there's a welcome sight. Her sharp eyes took in Lucinda's still visible bruises, but she made no comment. Looks like you two could use hot food and soft beds. Mrs. Blackburn, Flynn greeted her warmly, dismounting. This is Miss Lucinda Ames. We've had a long journey. I can see that. Sarah Blackburn's assessing gaze missed nothing, but her smile remained kind. Come in, come in. Stew's on the stove, and there's fresh bread cooling. The way station's interior was unexpectedly homey, polished wood floors covered with braided rugs, comfortable furniture arranged around a large fireplace, and the delicious aroma of cooking food filling the air. A long table dominated the dining area, while a counter with a guest book suggested the building's dual purpose as inn and mail station. You're my only guests tonight, Sarah informed them, leading the way to the dining area. Stage came through earlier, but nobody's staying over. You'll have the place to yourselves. Over bowls of venison stew and slices of fresh bread, Lucinda felt civilization returning to her bones. Sarah was a tactful hostess, keeping conversation light and undemanding. Only when they had finished eating did she address the obvious question. Trouble following you, Marshal, Flynn nodded. Might be. Better if you don't know details. Fair enough. Sarah collected their empty bowls. You need a warning if anyone comes asking. Would appreciate it. Sarah showed them to separate rooms upstairs, simple but clean, with real beds and washstands. To Lucinda, after days of rough camping, it seemed luxurious beyond measure. Take your time, Sarah told her kindly. Bathhouse is out back if you want hot water. I'll put a kettle on. Alone in her room, Lucinda sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by sudden exhaustion. The relative safety of crossing the border, combined with decent food and the prospect of a real bath, had released tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. A soft knock at her door roused her. Flynn stood in the hallway, his own weariness visible in the set of his shoulders. Everything all right? He asked. Yes, Lucinda assured him. Just tired, it's been a lot. Flynn nodded, understanding. Mrs. Blackburn says the bath is ready if you want it. I told her you'd go first. The thought of hot water was too tempting to resist. Lucinda gathered her clean clothes and followed Sarah's directions to the small bathhouse behind the main building. The wooden tub steamed invitingly, scented faintly with lavender. Lucinda undressed carefully, mindful of her healing bruises, and slipped into the water with a sigh of pure pleasure. She soaked until the water began to cool, washing away not just trail dust, but the lingering taint of the jail cell and auction block. When she returned to the main house, feeling renewed, she found Flynn and Sarah seated by the fire, deep in conversation that stopped abruptly at her entrance. Feel better, dear? Sarah asked, rising to her feet. Wonderfully so, Lucinda replied with genuine gratitude. Thank you. Bath's yours, Marshal, Sarah told Flynn. I've added more hot water. After Flynn departed, Sarah brought tea to the fireside, studying Lucinda with kind but shrewd eyes. Known the Marshal long? She asked casually. Not very, Lucinda admitted. He helped me out of a difficult situation. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Sounds like him. Flynn Sutton's got a reputation for standing up when others sit down. She poured tea into delicate cups that seemed incongruous in the frontier setting. Good man. Rare kind. You've known him a while, 5-6 years now. He helped me when some land grabbers tried to run me off this place after my husband died. Sarah handed Lucinda a cup. Never asked for anything in return, just said it was his job. That sounds familiar, Lucinda murmured, sipping the hot tea. Sarah's shrewd gaze assessed her again. Whatever trouble you're in, you could do worse than having Flynn Sutton on your side. I'm beginning to realize that. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the fire crackle and the evening wind in the pines outside. Lucinda felt a peace settling over her that had been absent for too long. Flynn rejoined them later, his hair damp from bathing, looking more relaxed than Lucinda had yet seen him. The three of them shared another pot of tea while Sarah told stories of the early days of Colorado Territory that had Lucinda laughing despite herself. When she finally retired to her room, Lucinda fell asleep almost instantly on the soft bed. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly safe. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee and frying bacon. Lucinda dressed quickly in her clean clothes and descended to find Flynn and Sarah already at breakfast. A map was spread between them on the table. "Morning," Flynn greeted her. "We were just discussing the best route to Silver Creek." "Two ways," Sarah explained, pointing to the map. "Main road's faster but more traveled. Back way adds half a day but keeps you away from curious eyes." "Back way," Flynn decided, folding the map. Better safe than sorry. After breakfast, they prepared to depart. Sarah packed them provisions: smoked meat, bread, cheese, and a jar of preserved peaches that she insisted Lucinda take. "For strength," the older woman said with a wink. "Journey's not over yet." As they mounted up, Sarah stood in the doorway, arms folded across her chest. "Watch your backs," she called. "And Flynn, don't be a stranger next time. 6 months is too long between visits." Flynn touched his hat brim in acknowledgement. "Yes, madam." They rode northwest, following a lesser trail that wound through dense forest and occasionally steep terrain. The day warmed steadily, but the tree cover provided welcome shade. Flynn seemed more at ease on his home ground, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the region. "Valley up ahead is prime grazing land," he said as they crested a ridge around midday. "Some of the best cattle country in Colorado." Below them stretched a vast meadow, bisected by a silver ribbon of river. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, tiny dots from their elevated perspective. "It's beautiful," Lucinda said sincerely. "Different from New Mexico, but beautiful." "Each place has its own character," Flynn agreed. "I've found there's something to appreciate wherever you go if you look with the right eyes." They stopped to rest the horses and eat some of Sarah's provisions. Sitting on sun-warmed rocks overlooking the valley, sharing bread and cheese, Lucinda felt an unexpected contentment. "When we reach Silver Creek," she asked, "what happens then?" Flynn considered before answering. "You'll need a safe place to stay while we gather evidence. There's a widow who runs a boarding house, Ruth Caldwell. Good woman, discreet. Then I'll need to contact the territorial marshal, get official sanction for next steps. And those would be building a case strong enough to bring charges. Your testimony, your father's records if we can retrieve them, other victims if we can find them." He looked at her directly. "It won't be quick or easy, Lucinda. These men have power and connections." "I'm not afraid of a fight," she replied. "Not a fair one, anyway." A smile tugged at Flynn's mouth. "I believe you." They continued their journey through the afternoon. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Flynn pointed to a distant plume of smoke rising above the trees. "Silver Creek," he said. "We'll be there by nightfall." The trail descended gradually, winding through pine forest that eventually gave way to cleared land. Small homesteads appeared, with fenced fields and livestock. They passed a sawmill beside a rushing stream, its water wheel turning steadily in the current. Dusk was settling as they finally rode into Silver Creek proper. The town was larger than Lucinda had expected, a main street lined with substantial buildings, side streets with neat houses, a church steeple rising against the darkening sky. Lamps were being lit in windows, and the saloon was already doing brisk business, piano music spilling into the street. Flynn led them to the livery stable at the edge of town. The stableman greeted him with obvious respect. "Marshal, didn't expect you back so soon." "Change of plans, Charlie," Flynn replied, dismounting. "These horses need good care. They've carried us a long way. Consider it done." Charlie helped Lucinda down, eyeing her with polite curiosity but asking no questions. Flynn gathered their saddlebags. "We'll walk from here," he told Lucinda quietly. "Less attention that way." They moved through side streets, avoiding the busier parts of town. Despite the growing darkness, Lucinda could sense the ordered prosperity of Silver Creek. Unlike Aztec's dusty desperation, this place felt established, secure. The boarding house stood on a corner lot, surrounded by a neat picket fence. Roses climbed trellises beside the front door, and curtained windows glowed with welcoming light. Flynn opened the gate for Lucinda, then led her up the path to the porch. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman in a spotless apron. Her shrewd eyes took in Flynn's badge, Lucinda's fading bruises, and their travel-worn appearance in one comprehensive glance. "Marshal Sutton," she greeted him. "You look like trouble's been nipping at your heels, Mrs. Caldwell." Flynn removed his hat. "This is Miss Lucinda Ames. She needs safe lodging for a while." Ruth Caldwell's expression softened as she studied Lucinda. "Come in, dear. You look dead on your feet." The boarding house interior was immaculate, polished floors, tasteful furnishings, everything in perfect order. Delicious smells wafted from the kitchen at the back of the house. "Just served supper," Ruth said, leading them to a small parlor off the main hall. "There's plenty left if you're hungry." "That would be wonderful," Lucinda said gratefully. While Ruth went to prepare plates, Flynn explained the situation in low tones. "Mrs. Caldwell is a widow, runs this place alone. Her husband was my predecessor as marshal. She understands discretion. She seems kind. She is. But don't cross her. She runs this place with an iron hand. No drinking, no swearing, no gentlemen callers upstairs." His eyes crinkled slightly. "Town joke is that outlaws would rather face a hanging judge than Mrs. Caldwell's disapproval." Ruth returned with loaded plates and hot coffee. While they ate, Flynn explained their circumstances in careful terms enough for Ruth to understand the danger without revealing details that might put her at risk. "So the young lady needs a safe haven while you sort out this business," Ruth summarized when he finished. "And those responsible might come looking." "That's about the size of it," Flynn confirmed. Ruth nodded decisively. "She'll have my best room, top floor, back of the house. Good view of the approach from all sides, and I still keep Hiram's shotgun loaded by the door." "I can't ask you to take such a risk," Lucinda protested. Ruth's expression hardened. "You're not asking, dear. I'm offering. Besides," she added with grim satisfaction, "I'd welcome the chance to point that shotgun at anyone who'd auction a woman like cattle." After supper, Ruth showed Lucinda to her room, a comfortable space with a real bed, washstand, wardrobe, and window overlooking the garden behind the house. Clean towels and a pitcher of hot water awaited her. "Bathrooms down the hall," Ruth explained. "Breakfast at 7 sharp. I don't hold with sleeping late." "Thank you," Lucinda said sincerely, "for everything." "No need for thanks," Ruth replied, her practical manner softening slightly. "The marshal's a good judge of character. If he brought you here, that's good enough for me." When Ruth departed, Flynn lingered in the doorway. "You'll be safe here," he assured her. "I need to report to my deputy, let him know I'm back. Then we'll plan our next steps. When will I see you?" The question escaped before Lucinda could consider how it might sound. Flynn's expression gentled. "I'll come by tomorrow morning. Try to get some rest." After he left, Lucinda sat on the edge of the bed, overcome by the events of the past days. From the horror of the auction block to the safety of this clean, quiet room seemed an impossible journey. Yet here she was. She washed, changed into a nightgown Ruth had provided, and slipped between crisp sheets. Sleep claimed her immediately, deep and dreamless. Morning arrived with birdsong and the distant sound of a church bell. Lucinda woke feeling rested for the first time in weeks. She dressed in her clean clothes from the trading post and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. The boarding house dining room held a long table where several people were already eating. Ruth stood at the head, serving from steaming platters. She smiled at Lucinda's entrance. "There you are, dear. Come meet your fellow boarders." Ruth introduced each with brisk efficiency, two elderly sisters who taught at the town school, a young clerk from the mercantile, a widow who worked at the dressmaker's shop. All nodded politely, curious but not intrusive. "Miss Ames is visiting from New Mexico," Ruth explained, pouring coffee. "A friend of the Marshal's." That simple statement seemed to satisfy any curiosity. Lucinda took the empty seat Ruth indicated and accepted a plate heaped with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Breakfast conversation flowed around her local news, weather predictions, mild gossip about townspeople Lucinda didn't know. It felt surreally normal after everything that had happened. A knock at the front door interrupted the meal. Ruth excused herself and returned moments later with Flynn, who stood in the doorway looking surprisingly formal in a clean shirt and polished badge. "Morning, folks," he greeted the table generally, then nodded to Lucinda. "Miss Ames, if you're finished with breakfast, I'd appreciate a word." Lucinda followed him to Ruth's small parlor. Flynn closed the door before speaking. "I've sent telegrams to the territorial marshal and governor," he said without preamble. "They're sending a federal marshal to meet us, someone with authority to cross territorial lines." "That's good news, isn't it?" "It is, but it will take time, at least a week, maybe more." Flynn looked troubled. "Meanwhile, we need your father's records to build our case." "Which means returning to the ranch," Lucinda concluded. Flynn nodded. "I can't ask you to go back there. It would be dangerous. I could try to find the documents myself." "No," Lucinda interrupted firmly. "I know where my father kept his important papers. Hidden places that outsiders wouldn't find. I need to go with you." Flynn studied her face. "You understand what you're risking if Wilkes or his men catch us there." "I understand." Lucinda met his gaze steadily. "This isn't just about getting my ranch back anymore. It's about justice for my father, for all the others they've stolen from." A long moment passed between them. Finally, Flynn nodded. "All right, but we do this carefully. We wait for word from the federal marshal, then plan every step." "How long?" 4 days, minimum, for the message to reach Denver and a response to return. He hesitated. "In the meantime, you should stay here, keep a low profile." The prospect of days confined to the boarding house chafed, but Lucinda recognized the wisdom of caution. "And what will you be doing?" "My job," Flynn replied with a faint smile. "Silver Creek still needs its marshal, and being seen around town conducting normal business will prevent suspicion if anyone's watching. You think they followed us here? I think we should assume it's possible." His expression turned serious. "Lucinda, promise me you won't leave this house alone, not until this is resolved." The intensity in his voice surprised her. "I promise." Flynn's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good, I'll check on you daily, bring any news." He glanced at his pocket watch. "I need to make rounds now." "Try not to worry." After he left, Lucinda returned to the dining room to find it empty except for Ruth, who was clearing the table. The marshal looked concerned, the older woman observed, stacking plates. "There's still danger," Lucinda admitted. "He wants me to stay inside for now." Ruth nodded approval. Wise man. Well, you needn't worry about boredom. I can always use help around the house if you're willing. The next 4 days established a pattern. Lucinda helped Ruth with household tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending linens. The work was familiar and oddly comforting, reminding her of days managing her father's ranch house. Ruth proved to be good company, practical. No nonsense, but with a dry wit that surfaced unexpectedly. Flynn visited each day, usually in the evening after his duties were complete. He brought news of the town, books for Lucinda to read, and once a box of candied ginger that made her eyes widen with delight. "How did you know I love ginger?" she asked, savoring a piece. Flynn looked somewhat embarrassed. "You mentioned it on the trail that your mother used to make ginger cookies for special occasions." The fact that he had remembered such a small detail touched Lucinda deeply. Their conversations grew longer each evening, ranging beyond their immediate concerns to personal histories and broader philosophies. Flynn revealed more of himself gradually: his childhood in Missouri, his brief stint as a Union soldier, though he'd been barely 16 when the war ended, his journey west to escape painful memories. In turn, Lucinda shared stories of her own life growing up on the ranch, learning to manage it alongside her father after her mother died of fever, her dreams of expanding their holdings before everything collapsed. On the fourth evening, Flynn arrived later than usual, his expression animated with suppressed excitement. "News?" Lucinda asked immediately. "Federal Marshal Daniel Prescott arrives tomorrow on the afternoon stage," Flynn confirmed. "He's bringing official documents authorizing investigation across territorial lines. So we can move forward with retrieving my father's records." Flynn nodded, lowering his voice though they were alone in Ruth's parlor. "We'll meet with Prescott tomorrow evening to form a plan. If all goes well, we could leave for your ranch the following morning." Excitement and apprehension mingled in Lucinda's chest. "How long a journey will it be?" 3 days, following the back routes. Flynn's eyes held hers. "It won't be without risk, Lucinda. Even with federal authority behind us." "I know," she replied steadily, "but it's necessary." Their gazes held for a long moment. Something shifted in Flynn's expression, a softening, a warming that made Lucinda's breath catch. "You're a remarkable woman," he said quietly. Before she could respond, Ruth appeared in the doorway with coffee and pie, breaking the moment. Yet throughout the remainder of Flynn's visit, a new awareness hummed between them, unspoken but undeniable. After Flynn departed, Lucinda helped Ruth with the dishes, her mind preoccupied with the coming journey and the growing complexity of her feelings for the Marshal. "You care for him," Ruth observed suddenly, handing Lucinda a plate to dry. Lucinda nearly dropped it. "I no need to deny it," Ruth continued matter-of-factly. "I have eyes in my head, and he feels the same, though he's trying hard not to show it." "It's complicated," Lucinda managed. "Love usually is," Ruth replied with the wisdom of experience, "especially when duty's involved. My Hiram was the same way, always putting the badge first." She paused in her washing. "But a good man who cares is worth the complications, in my experience." Lucinda had no answer to that, but Ruth's words followed her to bed that night, mingling with thoughts of the dangerous journey ahead. The following day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lucinda helped Ruth prepare rooms for new boarders expected on the evening stage, then spent the afternoon mending linens in the parlor, watching the clock. When Flynn finally arrived at dusk, he was accompanied by a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face. Marshal Daniel Prescott carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to authority. His handshake was firm as Flynn introduced them. "Miss Ames," he acknowledged. "Marshal Sutton has briefed me on your situation. Sounds like you've been through quite an ordeal." "Yes, sir," Lucinda replied. "But I'm more concerned about bringing those responsible to justice than my personal troubles." Approval flickered in Prescott's eyes. "Good attitude. Now let's discuss strategy." Ruth provided coffee and privacy, closing the parlor door as she departed. Prescott spread a map on the small table, weighing its corners with coffee cups. "Here's how I see this," he began, tracing routes with his finger. "We travel south using back trails, avoid populated areas. 3 of us, myself, Marshal Sutton, and you, Miss Ames, since you know where to find these documents. We approach your ranch under cover of darkness, retrieve the evidence, and return the same way." "The ranch will be occupied," Lucinda pointed out. "After they took me, a man named Porter moved in Wilkes' cousin. He'll have workers, maybe guards." Prescott nodded. "Expected as much. That's why we go at night, stay quiet, get what we need and disappear before they know we were there." "And if we're discovered?" Flynn asked. "I have federal authority to investigate suspected fraud and corruption." Prescott patted his breast pocket. "Papers signed by the governor himself. Local law won't stand against that, not officially anyway." "Unofficially is what concerns me," Flynn replied. "That's why we bring these." Prescott touched the revolver at his hip meaningfully. "Last resort, but available if needed." They spent the next hour planning details: the route, supplies needed, contingencies for various scenarios. Prescott was thorough and practical, addressing each potential complication with calm efficiency. When they finished, he gathered his map and stood. "I've taken a room at the hotel. We leave at first light, pack light, dress for rough country." His gaze rested on Lucinda. "This won't be an easy journey, Miss Ames. Sure you're up to it?" "I am," Lucinda replied without hesitation. After Prescott departed, Flynn lingered. "He's good," he told Lucinda. "One of the best. If anyone can get us through this, it's Prescott." "I trust your judgment," Lucinda said simply. Flynn moved to the window, looking out at the darkened street. "I wish there was another way, sending you back there after everything." "There isn't another way," Lucinda joined him at the window. "I know where to look, and it's my fight too." "I know." He turned to face her, his expression troubled. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Follow orders if trouble comes." "I promise." Their eyes held, the silence between them charged with things unsaid. Flynn's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then away. "I should go," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Early start tomorrow." "Yes," Lucinda agreed, though neither moved. Another moment passed before Flynn finally stepped back. "I'll come for you at dawn," he said. "Be ready to ride." After he left, Lucinda stood at the window watching his figure disappear into the night. Tomorrow they would begin the journey back to a place of pain and loss. Yet somehow, with Flynn beside her, she faced the prospect not with dread but with determination. Dawn broke clear and cool, the streets of Silver Creek still quiet as Lucinda waited on Ruth's porch. She wore the practical riding clothes from the trading post, with a borrowed coat against the morning chill. Her few possessions were packed in a small bag at her feet. Ruth stood in the doorway, arms folded. "You be careful, young lady. I expect to see you back here in one piece." "I will," Lucinda promised. "Thank you for everything." "Just doing what's right," Ruth replied gruffly. "And speaking of what's right." She pressed something into Lucinda's hand, a small revolver, well-maintained and loaded. "Belonged to my Hiram. Never know when a lady might need protection." Lucinda tucked the weapon into her coat pocket, touched by the gesture. "I'll return it safely. See that you do." Ruth's expression softened. "And watch out for our Marshal. He pretends he's made of iron, but he's flesh and blood like anyone else." Hoofbeats announced Flynn's arrival. He rode up with 2 additional horses, Lucinda's chestnut mare and a sturdy roan. Marshal Prescott followed on a big bay gelding, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. "Ready?" Flynn asked, dismounting to help with her bag. "Yes," Lucinda replied, taking a deep breath. They rode out of Silver Creek as the town was just beginning to stir. The journey south began without incident, following game trails and old hunting paths that kept them away from main roads. Prescott led the way, with Lucinda in the middle and Flynn bringing up the rear, watching their back trail. The first day passed uneventfully. They made good time, stopping only to rest the horses and eat quick meals from their provisions. Conversation was minimal, focused on practical matters. By evening, they had covered nearly 30 miles of rough country. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, keeping the fire small and their voices low. Prescott took first watch, leaving Flynn and Lucinda by the fire while he patrolled the perimeter. "How are you holding up?" Flynn asked quietly, passing her a cup of coffee. "Well enough," Lucinda replied, accepting the warm drink gratefully. "It's strange going back. I keep thinking about what I'll find who might be living in my house, sleeping in my father's bed." Flynn's expression was sympathetic. "Try not to dwell on it. We go in, find the documents, get out. Anything else comes later with the law behind us." "I know." She sipped her coffee, staring into the small flames. "It's just hard not to feel angry, thinking about strangers in my home." "Anger's natural," Flynn said. "Just don't let it cloud your judgment when we get there. Clear thinking keeps people alive in dangerous situations." Lucinda nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "You sound like you've had experience." "Some," he admitted. "The war taught me that emotion in battle gets men killed. Been trying to remember that lesson ever since." They fell silent, listening to the night sounds around them, the soft hooting of an owl, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the occasional stamp of a hobbled horse. "Why did you become a marshal?" Lucinda asked finally. "After what happened to your father, I mean." "Most would have chosen a different path." Flynn considered the question, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Thought about it, tried ranching for a while, then mining. Neither fit right." He looked up at the stars. "Kept seeing things that needed fixing, people being wronged with no one to stand for them. Found I couldn't walk away." "Like you couldn't walk away when you heard about me," Lucinda observed softly. "Something like that," he agreed, his eyes finding hers across the small fire. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Then Prescott's approaching footsteps broke the spell. "All quiet," the federal marshal reported, settling near the fire. "But we should keep watches all night. I'll take first, then you, Sutton. Miss Ames needs her rest." Lucinda started to protest that she could take a watch too, but Flynn's slight headshake stopped her. She understood Prescott was old school, with fixed ideas about a woman's capabilities. Better to conserve her energy for the challenges ahead than battle his preconceptions now. She retired to her bedroll, listening as the men discussed routes and contingencies in low voices. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of her father's ranch and faceless men pursuing her through endless canyons. The second day of travel brought them into increasingly familiar territory for Lucinda. They crossed land where she had ridden since childhood, though they stayed away from established trails. The landscape grew drier, transitioning from Colorado's pine forests to New Mexico's rugged mesas and sagebrush plains. By evening, they camped in a hidden arroyo just 10 miles from the Ames ranch. After a cold supper, they risked no fire this close to their destination. Prescott spread his map on a flat rock, illuminating it with a shielded lantern. "We approach from the north," he said, pointing. "Less chance of being seen that way, according to Miss Ames' description. We'll leave the horses here with our gear, proceed on foot for the final approach." "The documents are hidden in my father's study," Lucinda explained. "Behind a false panel in the bookcase, and in the root cellar beneath a loose flagstone." Prescott nodded. "We go in after midnight when everyone's likely asleep. Quick and quiet in and out. No confrontations unless absolutely necessary." "And if we're discovered?" Flynn asked. "I'll identify myself as a federal marshal investigating fraud. Should give any ordinary ranch hands pause." "If it's Wilkes or his men." Prescott's expression hardened. "Well, that's why we're armed." They settled in for a tense night's rest, taking turns on watch. Lucinda dozed fitfully, anxiety growing as the moment of return drew nearer. When Flynn woke her shortly after midnight, she was already half awake, heart pounding with anticipation. They moved out under a moonless sky, leading their horses for the first few miles, then leaving them hobbled in a hidden draw with the pack horse. The final approach was on foot, moving slowly and silently across terrain Lucinda knew by heart. The ranch house appeared as they crested a small rise, a substantial adobe structure with a shingled roof, dark windows reflecting starlight. A bunkhouse stood nearby, and corrals beyond. A single lamp burned in what had been the foreman's cabin. "Guard," Prescott whispered, indicating the light. "Probably keeping night watch." They circled wide, approaching the main house from the shadow of the barn. Prescott led the way, moving with surprising stealth for a man his size. Flynn stayed close to Lucinda, his presence reassuring in the tense darkness. The back door was locked, a new development since Lucinda's time. Flynn produced slim metal tools from his pocket and worked on the lock with practiced skill. "Useful skill for a lawman," Prescott commented in a barely audible whisper. "Takes a thief to catch one," Flynn replied as the lock yielded with a soft click. They entered the kitchen, familiar territory to Lucinda, though she noted changes immediately. Different dishes on the shelves, unfamiliar furniture. The sense of violation was physical, like a blow to her chest. Flynn touched her arm lightly, grounding her. "The study," he whispered. Lucinda nodded, leading the way through the dark house. Every step was laden with memories. Here she had helped her mother bake bread. There she had sat with her father planning the spring roundup. Now strangers slept under this roof, claiming what was hers. The study door stood partially open. Lucinda paused, listening for breathing or movement, then slipped inside. Moonlight through the windows revealed more changes. Her father's desk remained, but the chairs were different, and unfamiliar paintings hung on the walls. The bookcase still stood against the far wall. Lucinda moved to it immediately, fingers finding the hidden catch by memory. The false panel opened silently, revealing a small compartment behind. "It's here," she whispered, relief flooding through her as she withdrew a leather portfolio tied with string. All his correspondence with the bank, receipts of payments, everything. "Good," Prescott said from the doorway, where he kept watch. "Now the cellar." They moved to the kitchen again, Flynn lifting the trapdoor to the root cellar with careful silence. Lucinda descended the narrow steps, the familiar earthy smell bringing back memories of helping her mother preserve vegetables for winter. The flagstone was where she remembered, third from the north wall. Flynn helped her lift it, revealing a metal box nestled in the dirt beneath. Inside were more documents, deeds, bank drafts, her father's journal documenting his dealings with the bank and his suspicions that something wasn't right. "This is everything," Lucinda confirmed, clutching the box. "We can go now." They ascended from the cellar, Flynn replacing the trapdoor without a sound. Lucinda felt a curious mix of emotions: triumph at recovering the evidence, sorrow at seeing her home occupied by others, anger at the injustice of it all. As they moved toward the back door, a floorboard creaked beneath Prescott's weight. All three froze, listening intently. For a moment silence held. Then footsteps sounded from upstairs, heavy, masculine. A voice called out groggily, "Who's down there?" "Move," Prescott ordered quietly. "Now." They slipped out the back door as a lamp was lit upstairs. Flynn pulled it closed behind them, and they ran for the cover of the barn. Behind them, the house came alive with voices and movement. "Someone's been in the house," a man shouted. "Check the grounds." They pressed against the barn wall as the back door flew open, spilling lamplight into the yard. A man emerged holding a shotgun, not Wilkes, but someone Lucinda recognized as one of his deputies. "Split up," Prescott whispered. "Sutton, get Miss Ames back to the horses. I'll create a diversion, draw them away." "Daniel," Flynn began to protest. "Do it," Prescott ordered. "The evidence is what matters. Get it to safety." Before they could argue further, Prescott darted from cover, deliberately making noise as he headed toward the corrals. The deputy spotted him immediately. "There, by the corrals," he shouted, firing a wild shot that went high. More men poured from the house and bunkhouse as Prescott led them on a chase away from the barn. Flynn seized the moment, pulling Lucinda in the opposite direction. "Stay low," he whispered. "Move fast but quiet." They raced through shadows, keeping to the darkest parts of the ranch yard. Lucinda clutched the documents and box to her chest, heart pounding with each step. Behind them, shouting and the occasional gunshot indicated Prescott was still leading their pursuers away. They reached the edge of the property and plunged into the darkness beyond, running until Lucinda's lungs burned with each breath. Only when they were well clear did Flynn slow their pace. "We need to circle back to the horses," he said, voice tight with concern. "Prescott knows where to meet us." "Will he be all right?" Lucinda asked, gasping for air. "He's experienced, but we need to move quickly." Flynn took the heavy metal box from her arms. "Can you keep going?" She nodded, determination overriding exhaustion. They moved through the night, following a roundabout path back toward their hidden horses. Every distant sound made them pause, alert for pursuit. When they finally reached the draw where they'd left the animals, Flynn let out a soft whistle. Answering nickering confirmed the horses were still there, undisturbed. "We wait for Prescott," Flynn decided, helping Lucinda settle against a boulder. "If he's not here in an hour, we have to assume he's been captured. And then we ride for Colorado with the evidence." Flynn's expression was grim. "It's what he would want us to do." The hour crawled by with excruciating slowness. They sat in tense silence, straining to hear approaching footsteps. As the time limit neared its end, Flynn's face grew increasingly troubled. "We should prepare to leave," he said finally, checking his pocket watch one last time. As he spoke, a soft scuffing sound came from the rocks above. Both froze, hands moving to weapons. Then a low whistle, the same pattern Flynn had used earlier. "Prescott," Flynn breathed, returning the signal. The federal marshal appeared moments later, sliding down the embankment to join them. His coat was torn and blood stained his left sleeve, but he was smiling grimly. "Led them on a merry chase," he reported, sinking down beside them. "Lost them in the hills north of here. Don't think they made the connection to the missing documents, yet they just know someone was in the house." Flynn examined Prescott's arm. "Bullet graze," Prescott confirmed. "Nothing serious, but we need to move. They'll organize a proper search at first light." They mounted quickly, Lucinda securing the precious documents in her saddlebags. As they rode north under the vast starry sky, she felt a curious lightness despite the danger. She had recovered her father's legacy, the proof of the wrongs done to him. Now justice could follow. They pushed hard through the remainder of the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ranch. Dawn found them deep in rough country, following game trails that would be difficult to track. "We'll rest briefly," Prescott decided as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. "Horses need water, and we should check this arm properly." They stopped at a small seep spring, where water trickled from rocks into a natural basin. While the horses drank, Flynn tended Prescott's wound, indeed just a graze, but one that had bled significantly. "You're lucky," Flynn commented, bandaging the injury with strips torn from a clean shirt. "Wouldn't call any of this luck," Prescott replied. "Just necessity." He glanced at Lucinda, who was organizing the documents into more secure packages. "Those papers worth the trouble, Miss Ames?" "Yes," she said firmly. "My father documented everything: the bank's changing terms, interest rates that appeared from nowhere, meetings where threats were made, and letters proving collusion between the bank president and Sheriff Wilkes." Prescott nodded approval. "Good. Proper paper trail makes prosecution possible." He flexed his bandaged arm experimentally. "We should keep moving. I don't imagine Wilkes and his friends will give up easily." They rode throughout the day, stopping only when necessary. The terrain gradually changed as they moved northward, becoming more forested and mountainous as they approached the Colorado border. By late afternoon, they reached the river that marked the territorial boundary. "Once across, we're in Colorado," Flynn explained as they watered the horses. "Wilkes has less influence here, though not none. We'll still need to be careful until we reach Silver Creek." As Lucinda led her mare into the shallows to drink, she noticed movement on the ridge behind them: riders, at least 3, moving fast. "Flynn," she called, pointing. Both marshals spotted the pursuit immediately. "Mount up," Prescott ordered. "We cross now, make for the trees on the other side." They splashed across the river, horses lunging through the current. As they reached the far bank, shots rang out. The pursuers had spotted them and were firing from long range. "Ride," Flynn shouted, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "I'll hold them at the river." Prescott grabbed Lucinda's reins. "Come on. He knows what he's doing." They galloped for the tree line as Flynn took position behind a boulder, rifle steady as he fired at the approaching riders. The shots forced their pursuers to seek cover, buying precious time. Once in the trees, Prescott turned to Lucinda. "Stay here. I'm going back for Sutton." Before she could protest, he was gone, riding back toward the river. Lucinda dismounted, tying her horse securely, then moved to a position where she could see the confrontation unfolding. Flynn was still behind his boulder, exchanging fire with men now hidden among rocks on the far bank. Prescott approached from behind, using the trees for cover. 3 pursuers were visible now. Lucinda recognized Sheriff Wilkes among them, his distinctive hat unmistakable even at this distance. Prescott reached Flynn's position, and they conferred briefly. Then both men fired a coordinated volley that sent the pursuers diving for better cover. Using the moment, Flynn and Prescott mounted and raced toward the trees, bullets kicking up dust behind them. They reached Lucinda's position breathless but unharmed. "They'll be crossing the river soon," Flynn said, checking his ammunition. "We need to move deeper into Colorado, get to more populated areas where they won't risk open confrontation." They rode hard through the afternoon, following logging trails that wound through dense forest. Behind them, occasional sounds of pursuit kept them moving at a grueling pace. The horses began to tire, lathered with sweat despite the cool mountain air. As dusk approached, they emerged from forest into a small valley where a cluster of buildings stood beside a rushing stream: a logging camp, currently active, judging by the smoke rising from several chimneys. "We'll stop here," Prescott decided. "Safety in numbers." Wilkes won't risk a confrontation with witnesses. The logging camp proved to be home to about 20 men, supervised by a burly foreman named Haggerty who recognized Flynn immediately. Marshal Sutton didn't expect to see Law this far from town. His curious gaze took in Lucinda's disheveled appearance and Prescott's bandaged arm. "Official business, Tom," Flynn explained, keeping details minimal. "We need shelter for the night and fresh horses if you can spare them. Ours are nearly spent." "Trouble following?" Haggerty asked shrewdly. "Might be," Flynn admitted. "Men who don't respect territorial boundaries." Haggerty's expression hardened. "Well, they'll find more than they bargained for if they come here. My boys don't take kindly to troublemakers." He gestured to a small cabin near the cookhouse. "You can use that. Empty since the paymaster left yesterday. I'll have hot food sent over." The cabin was basic but clean: a table, chairs, 2 narrow beds, and a small stove that Haggerty's men soon had burning cheerfully. Hot food arrived shortly after, carried by the camp cook himself: stew, biscuits, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. As they ate, Flynn explained their situation to Prescott in greater detail: how the Ames ranch fit into the larger pattern of fraud they'd been investigating, the importance of the recovered documents. Lucinda listened, adding details where necessary, still somewhat stunned by the day's events. "We'll rest here tonight," Prescott decided when they'd finished. "The men Haggerty posted as lookouts will alert us to any approach. Tomorrow we push for Silver Creek, another full day's ride if we have fresh horses." Lucinda realized suddenly how exhausted she was, the adrenaline of escape fading, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. Flynn noticed her drooping eyelids. "You should sleep," he said gently. "Take one of the beds. Prescott and I will take watches." Too tired to argue, Lucinda curled on the narrow bed, still in her clothes. She heard the men's voices continuing their discussion as she drifted into sleep, Flynn's deep tones particularly reassuring. She woke abruptly to Flynn's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent in her ear. "Lucinda, wake up, they've found us." She sat up instantly, fully alert. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window. Prescott stood by the door, rifle ready. "How many?" she asked, reaching for her boots. "At least 6, Flynn replied, "including Wilkes. They're at the edge of camp trying to convince Haggerty they're pursuing fugitives. He's stalling them." "We need to move," Prescott said. "Back way through the trees. Horses are ready." They gathered their belongings quickly, Lucinda securing the documents inside her coat. Flynn led them through the cabin's rear door into the dim forest beyond. 3 saddled horses waited, held by a young logger who nodded to Flynn and melted back into the trees. From the direction of the camp came raised voices, the argument growing heated. They mounted swiftly, Flynn leading the way along a narrow trail that curved away from the logging operation. They had covered perhaps half a mile when shouts and gunfire erupted behind them. "They've realized we've gone," Prescott said grimly. "Ride hard. Don't stop for anything." The fresh horses responded willingly, carrying them at a gallop through the awakening forest. Sunlight gradually strengthened, dappling through pine branches overhead. The trail climbed steadily, winding through increasingly steep terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then faded entirely. Yet none of them suggested slowing their pace. They rode through the morning, stopping only briefly to water the horses at a mountain stream. "We should reach the main road to Silver Creek by midday," Flynn told Lucinda as they remounted. "From there, it's about 5 hours to town if we maintain a decent pace." "And Wilkes?" she asked. "He'll follow as far as he dares," Prescott answered. "But his authority ends at the territorial line. In Colorado, he's just another man with a gun and a wanted man if he uses it." They pushed on, the trail eventually joining a wider road that showed signs of regular travel. Lucinda's spirits lifted at this evidence of civilization. Each mile took them closer to safety, closer to justice for her father. By late afternoon, familiar landmarks appeared, rock formations Flynn had pointed out on their journey south, a distinctive bend in the river they'd forded days earlier. The road improved, showing wagon ruts and hoofprints of recent travel. "Almost home," Flynn said, riding alongside Lucinda. "How are you holding up?" "Tired," she admitted, "but glad. We got what we came for." He smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his face. "Yes, we did. Your father would be proud." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Despite everything, despite the danger and exhaustion, Lucinda realized she had never felt more alive, more purposeful. And Flynn Sutton's presence beside her was no small part of that feeling. The sun was setting when Silver Creek finally came into view, lights beginning to twinkle in windows as dusk gathered. The sight of the peaceful town, nestled in its mountain valley, brought a surge of emotion. Lucinda hadn't expected. Relief, yes, but also a curious sense of homecoming. They rode directly to the marshal's office, a solid building on the main street with living quarters attached at the back. Flynn's deputy, a young man named Parker, jumped to his feet as they entered. "Marshal, you're back." His eyes widened at their trail-worn appearance. "And Marshal Prescott, we got your telegram yesterday. Governor's office sent another this morning, asking for progress." "We've made considerable progress," Prescott said, placing his hat on Flynn's desk with a sigh of relief. "And we have the evidence to prove it." Flynn made quick introductions, then sent Parker to arrange rooms at the hotel for Prescott and Lucinda. "We'll clean up, get some food, then review everything we've recovered," he suggested. "Parker can telegraph the governor that we've returned safely with evidence." An hour later, refreshed by hot baths and clean clothes, they reconvened in Flynn's office. The documents from the Ames ranch lay spread across his desk: banknotes, correspondence, James Ames' careful journal entries. "This is exceptional," Prescott said, examining page after page. "Clear evidence of fraud, conspiracy, illegal seizure of property, and names that connect to cases across both territories." "Enough to bring charges?" Flynn asked. "More than enough." Prescott looked up, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "This will bring down not just Wilkes, but the entire network. Bank presidents, corrupt officials, all of them." "And my ranch?" Lucinda asked, hardly daring to hope. "Based on this evidence, the courts will almost certainly restore your property," Prescott assured her. "It may take some time for the legal process to work, but the outcome seems clear." Relief washed through Lucinda in a dizzying wave. Her father's legacy would be restored, his name cleared. Justice would come at last. "What happens now?" she asked. "I'll take these documents to Denver tomorrow," Prescott explained. "Present them to the territorial governor and federal judge. Arrest warrants will follow for Wilkes, the bank officials, all those implicated. A task force will be assembled to execute those warrants simultaneously, preventing any from fleeing." "How long will all that take?" Flynn asked. "A week, perhaps 2. Justice grinds slowly, but it grinds exceedingly fine." Prescott gathered the documents carefully. "In the meantime, Miss Ames should remain here in Silver Creek. Wilkes knows she's the key witness. He might still try to reach her before the arrests are made." Flynn nodded. "She'll stay at Mrs. Caldwell's boarding house, best protected place in town." "And I'll leave 2 federal deputies here when I depart," Prescott added. "Extra precaution." After finalizing plans for the next day, they shared a late supper at the hotel dining room. Despite her exhaustion, Lucinda felt a growing sense of optimism. The nightmare that had begun with her father's death was approaching its end. When Flynn escorted her back to the boarding house, Ruth Caldwell was wading up, concern etched on her kind face. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed, embracing Lucinda. "When I heard you'd returned, I couldn't rest until I saw you safe with my own eyes." "We got what we went for," Lucinda told her. "It's not over yet, but we're close." "You look dead on your feet," Ruth observed. "Straight to bed with you. Questions can wait till morning." Flynn lingered in the doorway as Ruth bustled Lucinda toward the stairs. "I'll come by tomorrow," he promised, "after Prescott leaves for Denver." "Thank you," Lucinda said, meaning it for everything: the rescue, the journey, the promise of justice to come. His eyes held hers for a moment, conveying something beyond words. Then he touched his hat brim in farewell and was gone into the night. Lucinda slept deeply, dreamlessly, waking only when sunlight streamed through her window. She dressed in borrowed clothes. Ruth had arranged for the dressmaker to send over several suitable outfits on account, and descended to find the boarding house quiet. Other residents already departed for their daily activities. Ruth served breakfast with her usual efficiency, tactfully avoiding questions about the journey. "The marshal stopped by earlier," she mentioned casually. "Said he'd return mid-morning after seeing Marshal Prescott off on the stage." True to his word, Flynn arrived as Lucinda was helping Ruth with the dishes. He looked rested, freshly shaved, his badge gleaming on his vest. "Prescott's on his way to Denver," he reported, accepting coffee from Ruth, "with all the documents secured. He's optimistic about quick action from the governor." "And meanwhile," Lucinda asked, "meanwhile, you stay here in Silver Creek?" Flynn sipped his coffee. "Two federal deputies arrived on the morning stage. They'll maintain a visible presence in town until the warrants are executed." "So I'm still in danger," Lucinda concluded. "Potentially," Flynn admitted. "Wilkes is desperate. Men like that are unpredictable." Ruth sniffed disapprovingly. "Well, he'll find more than he bargained for if he shows his face in my establishment." Flynn smiled at the older woman's fierce protectiveness. "I don't doubt it, Mrs. Caldwell. Still, precautions are wise. Lucinda shouldn't wander alone, especially after dark." The next days established a new routine. Lucinda helped Ruth with the boarding house during mornings. Afternoons often found her at Flynn's office, helping organize additional evidence or providing clarification on her father's documents. Evenings were quiet supper with the other boarders, then reading or conversation in Ruth's parlor. Flynn visited daily, bringing news of the investigation's progress. 4 days after Prescott's departure, a telegram arrived confirming that arrest warrants had been issued for Sheriff Wilkes, banker Clement Porter, and 5 other conspirators across the territories. "A federal task force is assembling," Flynn explained, reading the telegram aloud to Lucinda in Ruth's parlor. "They'll move simultaneously against all parties in 3 days' time." 3 days, Lucinda repeated, hardly believing the end was so near. "And then?" "Then you'll be free to reclaim your ranch," Flynn said, "though the legal formalities might take some weeks to complete." Lucinda nodded, turning this information over in her mind. The ranch, her home for 22 years, would be hers again. Yet the prospect brought more complicated feelings than she had expected. "You seem troubled," Flynn observed, studying her face. "I thought this would be welcome news." "It is," she assured him quickly. "It's just, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure the ranch will feel the same." Flynn's expression softened with understanding. "Places hold memories, good and bad. Sometimes the bad ones taint even the best places." "Yes," Lucinda agreed, surprised by his perception. "Exactly that." They sat in companionable silence, the ticking of Ruth's mantel clock the only sound. Outside, evening settled over Silver Creek, lights appearing in windows along the quiet streets. "Would you consider staying?" Flynn asked suddenly. In Silver Creek, I mean, at least for a while. The question caught Lucinda off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead. You could sell the ranch, he suggested. Start fresh here. The town's growing. Someone with your skills and experience would do well. My skills? Lucinda smiled faintly. I'm not sure raising cattle translates to town life. You underestimate yourself, Flynn replied seriously. You're intelligent, resourceful, determined. Those qualities serve anywhere. His evident belief in her capabilities touched Lucinda deeply. For so long, she had defined herself by her father's ranch, her role there. The idea of a different future, one she chose for herself, was both frightening and exhilarating. I'll consider it, she promised. After the arrests, after everything settled, Flynn nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Yet something in his eyes suggested he had more to say, something held back by caution, or perhaps uncertainty. Before either could break the silence that had fallen between them, Ruth entered with coffee and her famous apple tart. The moment passed, but Lucinda found herself returning to Flynn's question later that night as she prepared for bed. Stay in Silver Creek. Could she build a new life here, away from painful memories? And was Flynn Sutton part of the reason she might consider it? The next morning brought unexpected news. A rider from the logging camp arrived with word that Sheriff Wilkes and 2 men had been seen in the area, apparently tracking toward Silver Creek. He's desperate, Flynn told Lucinda grimly after receiving the report. The warrants are public now. He knows his only chance is to eliminate witnesses before he's arrested. Meaning me, Lucinda concluded. We're moving you to my quarters behind the marshal's office, Flynn decided. More defensible than the boarding house, and I don't want to put Mrs. Caldwell at risk. Despite Ruth's protests that her shotgun was protection enough, Lucinda was relocated by midday. Flynn's living quarters were sparse but comfortable, 2 rooms behind the jail office, simply furnished but meticulously neat. You'll take the bedroom, he insisted. I'll sleep in the office. The federal deputies will maintain watches outside. That evening brought a rising tension to Silver Creek. Word of Wilkes' approach had spread through town, and citizens responded with typical frontier solidarity. Several ranchers and shopkeepers appeared at the marshal's office, offering assistance. Wilkes won't find easy pickings here, the blacksmith declared, shotgun across his massive arms. This ain't Aztec, where law's for sale. Flynn organized the volunteers into watch rotations, positioning them strategically around the town center. By nightfall, Silver Creek was as secure as a frontier town could be, with armed citizens supplementing the lawmen's vigilance. In Flynn's quarters, Lucinda sat at the small table while he cleaned and checked his weapons with methodical precision. The familiar routine seemed to calm him, though she could sense his underlying concern. You've built something good here, she observed, watching as townspeople moved purposefully past the window, taking up their assigned positions. These people trust you, respect you. Flynn looked up from his Colt, a faint smile touching his lips. Took time. But yes, we've built a community worth defending. We, all of us, he clarified. That's what makes a town work, everyone contributing, everyone having a stake in its success. Lucinda thought of Aztec, where corruption had poisoned any sense of community. Silver Creek felt fundamentally different, a place where people stood together against threats, where the law served rather than oppressed. I can see why you chose to stay here, she said softly. Flynn set his revolver aside, regarding her thoughtfully. When I first arrived, Silver Creek was little more than a played-out mining camp. But I saw potential not in the silver that was gone, but in the people who remained. They needed someone to believe in the town's future. He paused. Sometimes believing is half the battle. And the other half? Hard work, he replied simply. Day after day, making small improvements, standing firm when challenges come. The philosophy resonated with Lucinda. Wasn't that how her father had built their ranch? Patient work, year after year, through drought and prosperity alike. Their conversation was interrupted by Deputy Parker, who entered with news from the outlying sentries. Ryder spotted 3 men approaching from the south, he reported. Moving slow, keeping to cover, about 2 miles out. Flynn stood, buckling on his gun belt. Alert the volunteers. I want everyone in position, but no shooting unless I give the order. We take them alive if possible. After Parker departed, Flynn turned to Lucinda. Stay inside, away from windows. The deputies will remain stationed outside. I need to coordinate our defense. Be careful, she said, unable to keep worry from her voice. His expression softened. Always am. He hesitated, then stepped closer, one hand lifting to touch her cheek briefly. This ends tonight, Lucinda, one way or another. The unexpected gesture left her speechless. Flynn held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and strode out, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the echo of his touch on her skin. The next hours passed with excruciating slowness. Lucinda paced Flynn's quarters, listening to movements outside, men's voices, occasional footsteps, the distant nickering of horses. The town had fallen unnaturally quiet otherwise, its normal evening activities suspended in anticipation of confrontation. From her limited vantage point at the window, she could see portions of the main street. Armed men stood in doorways and between buildings, watching the approaches to town. The 2 federal deputies were positioned directly across from the marshal's office, rifles ready. Just after midnight, a commotion erupted at the south end of town. Shouts, then the crack of a single gunshot. Lucinda pressed herself to the window, straining to see what was happening. More shouts followed, then the sound of running feet. The door burst open, startling her badly. Deputy Parker stood there, breathless and wide-eyed. They've split up, he gasped. Trying to create confusion. Marshal sent me to check on you. I'm fine, Lucinda assured him. What's happening? Wilkes and 1 man came in shooting at the south checkpoint. The 3rd man's unaccounted for. Parker glanced nervously over his shoulder. Marshal thinks he might be circling around to get to you. As if summoned by the words, a shadow moved past the window. Parker spun, drawing his revolver, but too late. The window shattered inward as a shot exploded in the confined space. Parker cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. Lucinda dropped to the floor, crawling toward the deputy's fallen weapon. Before she could reach it, the broken window frame splintered further as a man forced his way through. Lucinda recognized him instantly. Porter, the banker's cousin who had occupied her ranch. His face was filthy, his clothes torn, but the malice in his eyes was unmistakable. There you are, he snarled, training his revolver on her. You've caused enough trouble, Miss Ames. Lucinda's hand closed around Ruth's small revolver, still in her coat pocket hanging near the door. She drew it slowly, keeping the movement concealed by her skirts. It's over, Porter, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Federal warrants have been issued. Killing me won't change that. Maybe not, he agreed, stepping closer. But it'll be satisfying all the same. You should have just accepted your fate back in Aztec. Like my father should have accepted your fraud, Lucinda countered, anger overriding fear. Some things are worth fighting for. Porter's face twisted with rage. Your father was a fool, and you're your father's daughter. Yes, Lucinda agreed, raising Ruth's revolver in one swift motion. I am. She fired just as Porter lunged toward her. The shot caught him in the chest, driving him backward. He staggered, disbelief crossing his face, then collapsed to the floor. Outside, the gunfire had intensified. Lucinda moved quickly to Parker, who was conscious but bleeding heavily. She tore strips from her petticoat, fashioning a makeshift bandage for his wounded shoulder. "The Marshal," Parker gasped. "Need to help him." "You're staying here," Lucinda said firmly, pressing the bandage in place. "I'll find Flynn." Retrieving Parker's revolver to supplement Ruth's smaller weapon, Lucinda moved cautiously to the door. The main street was chaotic. Gunfire flashed from several positions, and men shouted conflicting orders. Through the confusion, she spotted Flynn and one of the federal deputies pinned behind an overturned wagon, exchanging fire with unseen opponents near the saloon. Making a swift decision, Lucinda slipped out the back door of the marshal's quarters. She circled behind the buildings, using the darkness and her knowledge of the town layout to approach the saloon from behind. The rear entrance stood partially open. Inside, she could hear movement, someone breathing heavily, the metallic click of a revolver being reloaded. Moving silently, she peered around the doorframe. Sheriff Wilkes stood at a window, rifle braced on the sill as he took aim at the overturned wagon where Flynn sheltered. His back was to Lucinda, his attention focused entirely on his target. "Drop the rifle, Wilkes," she commanded, both revolvers trained on his back. He froze, then turned slowly, recognition and hatred dawning on his face. "Well, well, the Ames girl should have finished you when I had the chance." "Yes, you should have," Lucinda agreed coldly. "Now drop the weapon." Wilkes seemed to consider his options, eyes calculating. Then, with deliberate slowness, he lowered his rifle. "You don't have the stomach to shoot a man in cold blood," he said, a taunting note in his voice. "After what you did to my father, to me." "Don't be so sure," Lucinda replied, "but I'd rather see you stand trial, face justice properly." A cruel smile twisted Wilkes' mouth. "Justice in this world." His hand moved suddenly, reaching for the revolver at his hip. Lucinda fired first, Ruth's small revolver barking in the confined space. Her shot caught Wilkes in the shoulder, spinning him against the wall. Before he could recover, the saloon's front doors burst open and Flynn charged in, weapon raised. "Don't move, Wilkes," he ordered, voice cold with authority. "It's over." The sheriff slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his fingers as he clutched his wounded shoulder. "Sutton," he spat. "Always the righteous lawman." Flynn moved forward, kicking. Wilkes dropped weapons aside. "Lucinda," he said, not taking his eyes off the prisoner. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she confirmed, lowering her revolvers. "Parker's wounded in your quarters. Porter's dead." Flynn nodded, face grim, as he pulled Wilkes to his feet. "The third man surrendered to the deputies. It's finished." As Wilkes was led away in handcuffs, the tension that had held Silver Creek in its grip began to dissipate. Townspeople emerged from their positions, gathering in small groups to share experiences and reassurances. A doctor hurried toward the marshal's office to tend Parker's wound. In the aftermath, Flynn found Lucinda sitting on the steps of the jail, watching as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. "You took an awful risk," he said, settling beside her. "Going after Wilkes alone." "I saw an opportunity and took it," she replied simply. "Isn't that what you would have done?" A reluctant smile touched his lips. "Can't argue that." He studied her face in the growing light. "You're a remarkable woman, Lucinda Ames, so you've said before. I mean it more each time." His hand found hers on the rough wooden step, fingers intertwining with gentle firmness. "When I first saw you on that auction block, I knew you were someone worth fighting for. What I didn't know then was how much I'd come to admire you, to care for you." Lucinda's heart quickened at his words, at the warmth of his hand covering hers. "Flynn, let me finish," he interrupted softly. "I'm not good with words, especially these kinds of words, but I need to say this." He took a deep breath. "I know you have your ranch to reclaim, your life to rebuild. and I would never stand in the way of what you want or need. But if there's any chance that your future might include Silver Creek, might include me, I'd be honored to walk that path with you." The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability beneath his usual steadiness, touched Lucinda deeply. In this man, she recognized qualities she had always valued: integrity, courage, compassion, and something more, a connection that had grown from respect to friendship to something deeper. "When I was a girl," she said carefully, "my father told me that home isn't just a place. It's where you feel safe, where you belong." She turned her hand to clasp his more firmly. "I felt that here in Silver Creek, with you." "Does that mean," "It means," she interrupted with a small smile, "that I'm considering your suggestion about staying, very seriously considering it." Joy brightened Flynn's tired face. With uncharacteristic impulsiveness, he raised her hand to his lips. "I'll do everything in my power to make sure you never regret that decision." "I know you will," Lucinda replied softly. "That's why it's an easy choice to make." As the sun rose fully over Silver Creek, they sat together in companionable silence, hands still joined. The future stretched before them, uncertain in some ways, but rich with possibility. For Lucinda, who had lost so much, the promise of a new beginning with this honorable man felt like a gift beyond measure. 2 months later, Lucinda stood on the porch of her father's ranch house, her ranch house now, legally and irrefutably. The federal investigation had moved with unprecedented speed, resulting in convictions for all involved in the land fraud scheme. As predicted, the courts had restored her property, along with compensation for damages suffered. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and distant wood smoke. In the pasture beyond the barn, cattle grazed peacefully, a new start for the herd her father had worked so hard to build. Behind her, the door opened, and Flynn stepped out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Just thinking," she replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "About endings and beginnings." Flynn understood, as he always seemed to. In the weeks since Wilkes' arrest, their relationship had deepened into something neither had expected to find. They had traveled together to reclaim the ranch, working side by side to restore what had been damaged during its unlawful occupation. "The buyer from Denver seems interested," Flynn commented. "Fair price from what you've said." Lucinda nodded. The decision to sell the ranch had not been easy, but it felt right. Too many painful memories lingered here, despite the justice that had been served. "Once the sale is finalized, we can start looking for that property near Silver Creek," she said. "The one with the good water and south-facing slope." Flynn smiled, his arm slipping around her waist. "Perfect for raising horses like you've always wanted. And not too far from town for the marshal to ride home for supper," she added with a smile of her own. The past weeks had confirmed what both had sensed, that they were better together than apart. Flynn had proposed marriage with characteristic straightforwardness, offering a simple gold band and a promise of partnership in all things. Lucinda had accepted with equal directness, knowing that in Flynn Sutton she had found not just a protector but a true companion. "Ruth's already planning the wedding," Flynn mentioned, amusement coloring his tone. "Says the boarding house parlor is too small, insists on the church." "She's probably right," Lucinda agreed. "Half the town seems determined to attend. That's what happens when you help bring down a corruption ring that stretched across territories. People consider you heroes." Lucinda shook her head, still uncomfortable with such recognition. "We just did what was right." "Yes," Flynn agreed, turning her gently to face him. "We did, and we'll keep doing what's right together." As the setting sun gilded the distant mountains, Flynn drew Lucinda closer. His kiss held promise of home, of family, of a future built on mutual respect and deepening love. From the horror of the auction block to this moment of perfect contentment seemed an impossible journey, yet they had made it, step by determined step. "I love you, Lucinda Ames," Flynn murmured against her hair. "Have since the moment you stood up on that auction block, bruised but unbroken." "And I love you, Flynn Sutton," she replied softly, "the man who bought my freedom and gave me a new life in return." Together they watched twilight settle over the land, holding close the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced the past, with courage, with honor, and with an unbreakable bond that had been forged in the crucible of adversity and tempered by love.